Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. In his encyclical Laudato Si on the environment, the Pope advances what he calls an ethical and spiritual itinerary to explore the encyclical, its implications, and how binding it is on Catholics. I'm joined by the President of the U.S. Bishops' Conference and the Archbishop of Louisville, His Excellency Joseph Kurtz. Archbishop, thank you for being here.
Great to be with you, Raymond.
Pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming into the homestead here.
Absolutely.
Tell me, give me the overview of this encyclical. The Pope seems to be stressing and trying to carve out an holistic ecology, if you will.
He really is. I guess you might say that there's a twin concern that our Holy Father has, and that is care of one another, especially those who are poor, and care of our home, because we have a common home. It's, in that sense, it's very folksy, what he's saying. And he's saying our relationship to God, our care for our brothers and sisters, and our care for our home. Echo, of course, is the Greek for home. Sure. Our care for our home is indeed what I would call a spiritual and a moral framework that ought to drive great decisions in our life and in the life of leaders in the world. You can hear, in fact, some accounts I've read, they said that there are 85 footnotes and citations from John Paul II and Benedict XVI in this encyclical. There sure.
I want to read one of those references. This is early on. This is citation number 6. We'll put it up full screen so everybody can see. It says, Pope Benedict asked us to recognize that the natural environment has been gravely damaged by our irresponsible behavior. The social environment has also suffered damage. Both are ultimately due to the same evil, the notion that there are no indisputable truths to guide our lives, and hence human freedom is limitless. Your thoughts about that phrase, what it tells us?
Well, if someone were asked who just said that, people would say, well, that's obviously Pope Francis. It's very interesting that the foundational document in some ways was St. John Paul II in 1990 when he did his World, for the World Day of Peace.
Right.
Union with God and union with God's creation. So I think you've said it well, that Pope Francis very wisely builds on the Catholic social teaching that came to him when he began his pontificate.
There is a, you know, they always called Benedict XVI the Green Pope. He was the first one to put the solar panels on the Paul VI Hall and buy forests to offset the carbon footprint of the Vatican. His idea, if I'm understanding it properly, was you've got a group of people here who are committed to the environment and preserving the environment. And if he could reach them and say, you know, we agree with you. Nature, preserving nature is important. Let's look at the totality of nature and allow all of God's creation to bloom as it was intended. Is that what Pope Francis is continuing
in many ways he is, where he introduces the term human ecology. Very few, his notion of an integral ecology is to say, no, it's not a choice of being for respecting each human being from conception to natural death, or caring for our home. Like any family, we care for one another, and we care for the home that we live under the roof. So in many, many ways, I think you're right, that is a continuation of what Pope Benedict has said, but with a renewed urgency. I don't want to simply say, well, it's simply a continuation. No, there's that challenging theme that's coming through all of the encyclical that we need to act.
The Pope spends an awful lot of time here, really the first half of this document, detailing the particulars of climate change and ecosystem degeneration and attacks. Is that a concern? That there's so much emphasis on this science when the Pope's not a scientist?
Well, remember, who did he found this document on? It was the great legacy of St. Francis of Assisi. And Francis of Assisi talks about his sister, the earth. And I think there's some point in which our Holy Father says in that early section, scientists are the ones, or science is the ones that allow us to uncover the cry of your sister. It's a poetic way of saying it, but you're right. Of course, our Holy Father's not an economist, he's not a scientist, but he's a moral leader who wants to be in dialogue with the best of scientific findings.
I want to put this key section up. This is, of course, referenced everywhere. So much of the media coverage just says climate change. Pope talks about climate change, and they ignore everything else. We'll put this up and put it in some proper context. This is from citation 23 in the encyclical. The climate is a common good belonging to all and meant for all. A very solid scientific consensus indicates that we are presently witnessing a disturbing warming of the climatic system. Humanity is called to recognize the need for changes of lifestyle, production, and consumption in order to combat this warming, or at least the human causes which produce or aggravate it. A number of scientific studies indicate that most global warming in recent decades is due to the great concentration of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen oxides, and others, released mainly as a result of human activity. Is there a danger in affirming that humans and human activity create climate change, if climate change is identified as the great evil here?
Well, remember, when you read the entire encyclical, our Holy Father is saying human activity is one of the causes, and I would dare say that my training in theology always said, well, when you're dealing with important issues like life and death issues, tutsiorism, always take the safer course. So if some people will say, well, this person's really not sick, and the other one said, you know, they're about on their deathbed, you listen to the safer course because you're wanting to preserve that person's life. I think what our Holy Father is saying, because later he says, listen, I'm not trying to settle any of the the disputes with science. I'm not trying to settle differences. No, he's saying, let's take the safer course here, because in many ways, why wouldn't we not want to be called to a simpler lifestyle and to areas in which we can help, and most especially the poorest of poor people? Because often, as you know, I've been into Ethiopia, into places where you see the terrible difficulties where there's not adequate water, where disease is rampant. These are real problems, and our Holy Father sees them.
You mentioned that a moment ago, and I'll put this quote up because you just referenced it. It's in 61. He says, on many concrete questions, the Church has no reason to offer a definitive opinion. She knows that honest debate must be encouraged among experts, that we need only take a frank look at the facts to see that our common home is falling into serious disrepair. Does that mean that the scientific portions of this, where the Pope is musing on climate change and what might be done about it, are those prudential judgments, basically?
Well, no, I think it's first of all saying, our Holy Father saying, listen, I'm not a scientist. He says, I'm basing my moral voice on the best information I have. I'm basing a moral voice. But remember, he's not giving a concrete blueprint that says, now these are the 5 or the 25 or the 50 things that you need to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's not giving directives. What he's giving is a moral and a spiritual challenge that people in dialogue, people who are scientists and economists, come on, you need to help us deal with real issues in this world.
But it sounds, and if you read my email, it sounds like he's offering directives.
No.
You know, when he says that carbon dioxide is a pollutant, well, you and I are creating carbon dioxide, probably a lot of it from this end of the table, every day. So if it's a pollutant and I'm releasing it and that's hurting the environment, I got to go, right?
Listen, the Holy Father's message is the key message he's saying is, what are we going to leave to our children? What kind of a world are our children going to inherit? He's speaking of a moral framework. And so people who might be eager to say, well, let me parse each sentence that deals with the scientific studies that he's given. He's certainly speaking of them, and he's giving an urgency. But I think we need to quickly go to the moral area, because that's really the point of the encyclical.
So this is not a, we do not have to enact every one of these. For instance, a lot of the emails today say the Pope calls harmful habits of consumption something, quote, a simple example is the increasing use and power of air conditioning. Some people said, so to be a good Catholic and to abide by the Pope's teaching, do I have to stop using air conditioning?
Well, the first thing that we have to do is we have to read the whole encyclical. And we have to become students, because I think we run the danger of missing the whole because we're looking at one little piece. He talks about excessive consumerism.
He does.
There's no question about
it. Global situation where taxes would be imposed in an international body.
But he talks about a throwaway culture. When he gets into what you might call directives, they tend to be moral directives saying, what is your place in this throwaway culture? How are you treating other people? How are you treating your possessions? And how are you looking at the common good instead of my own self-interest? How is the common good driving you? And I think they're valid moral issues he's raising.
But when you get to the specifics, and there are some specifics here that he advances,
of course.
Those are prudential. When in the hands of politicians or others. I mean, Jeb Bush was cornered the other day. I won't play the bite we were going to, but I don't want to use the time. They confronted him and said, well, do you agree with what the Pope said? And he said, you know, I don't get my politics from the Pope, but I'm going to read it with attention and listen to what he has to say. Is he obliged as a Catholic to follow exactly to the letter these objectives and turn, for instance, allow the UN to become the governing body to control the environment?
Raymond, let's be clear on this. I'm not going to talk about individual politicians. I mean, that would be silly for
or any
to do
politician.
Or any politician. However, what I think our Holy Father is saying is that anyone who says, I'm an economist and it has nothing to do with morality, anyone who says, I'm a politician and this has nothing to do with morality, we're on thin ice. Because the moral voice says, because you can do something, you have to ask the question, ought I do this? Should I do it? Is this really promoting the common good? Is this really, in a sense, living out God's plan when he said in Genesis 2:15, till and care for the earth? Till and care for the earth. Not till only, but till and care for. That's, I think, a vision that is part of our roots in our faith. That's what our Holy Father's saying.
Earlier today, and even here, you said this is not a political blueprint.
No.
Yet the Pope's stated intention with this encyclical was to shape and help contribute to the enacting of a UN treaty at the end of the year in Paris. Isn't that a political end?
Well, his intent was to, and you can go with his own words, his intent is to contribute to meaningful dialogue. The word he uses over and over and over again is there needs to be substantial and not weak dialogue. Dialogue that will have a reason. And if you notice, he says nothing about future summits. He does say something about
he comments on the ones that didn't work.
And you know what? We all need to be able to say, well, here's where we got it right, or here's where we didn't get it right. But you don't see in this document where a Holy Father is saying, now these are the 3 principles I'm doing. If he comes the closest when he says, do not fall into the trap of population control. As a substitute for dealing with excessive consumerism. Do you remember that?
I do.
That is a central...
No, we're going to get into that in the next segment. We'll put it full
I'm glad to anticipate. But that's a central part of what he's saying. That's about as close as he's getting to a directive. And they're directives that go to the very heart of our church teaching.
I need to shift to the Synod for a moment. You are going to be at the Synod on the Family.
Yes.
Once again, representing the United States as the president of the conference. We have heard in recent weeks the German cardinals and others wanting to advance this notion, Archbishop Johann Boni, who was just appointed, this notion that homosexual relationships and individuals need to be discussed front and center, and even gay marriage should be a part of the discussion at the Synod. Do you agree?
Well, care for all people, accompanying all families, needs to be central.
Sure.
Now, I think there are certain expectations that I think move us beyond what I think would be what it means to accompany people. So that what I'm looking at, and I think we all should be looking at, is what is the framing document that we're beginning with? Because that will really be what sets the tone. And you may recall that the lineamenta that will be now revised, and a new document, as you know, next week will come out.
Next week, yeah.
That is being revised, but that document did talk about families in which a person is experiencing same-sex attraction, and what is pastoral care. Pastoral accompaniment will not mean that we are weakening our commitment to the sanctity of marriage as the union of one man and one woman. It just won't mean that.
So gay people you'll be discussing, or possibly, but not necessarily gay marriage or unions. Because that seems to be the intention of some of these folks. I would say
that the key will be, as I see it, the pastoral care. And I think you'll be able... Of individuals. And you'll be able... Well, the pastoral care of people. You'll be able to see, when you see the instrumentum laboris, what will be the beginning stages. And so you and I guess, should wait till we read that, but that would be my sense.
Well, we will meet again.
Yes.
I had Cardinal Walter Casper on the show the last 2 weeks talking about his proposal at length. In your mind, is that proposal finished? Has that conversation ended, or
well, I'm
is
not
it
sure
still
which
an open question?
The proposal you're talking about would be
for divorced
in terms
and remarried
of a penitential process.
Right, giving them a fast pass
Let me say
penitential
this,
process to the sacrament.
as you well know, at the last synod, the primary path of reaching out to people who are divorced and remarried situation is to streamline the annulment process. Streamlining in a sense of taking away barriers that will not mar the integrity of the sacrament. It is in the document that the penitential process, and so perhaps it will be talked about. I don't know what will be in the coming document, but my suspicion will be that the vast majority of time will be spent on what it means to preserve the integrity of an annulment, but yet make it accessible to people.
So you and the American group would not support the Casper
My gosh,
proposal.
I only speak for myself.
Would you support it?
No.
No? Okay. We'll leave it there. Archbishop Kurtz, we will be in touch in the coming days. Thank you so much for your candor and for being here.